Carlos Nelson with What's Up Kansas City and Cascade Sports. And today is a continuation on our theme of high achievers, wave of the future, high achievers out of our community. And we have a Hispanic student that is doing very, very well in her academics, in her pursuit of happiness. Who do we have here?
Jackie Aguirre. I'm from Kansas City, born and raised, and I'm currently a 1L at the University of Notre Dame's Law School.
All right. Hey, Jackie, I want to say you know the drill. Hopefully, you do know the drill. uh,
I'm ready.
and let our community know a little more about you. Uh, and as I say, the drill is going back to kindergarten and talking to our audience about who you are, some of the trials and tribulations that you've gone through uh, to get to the point you are in your life academically, skill set, and otherwise, and try to give the propers to the people that help you reach your goals. The
Yeah.
ball is in your court, and you know the drill.
All right. I'm part of a Mexican American family that's been in Kansas City for generations. But my parents were the first ones to really move outside of Kansas City, like the west side portion of Kansas City. So I grew up in the suburbs up north, which is a primarily white area. I didn't grow up surrounded by a lot of people who looked like me. When I was younger in elementary school, I went to a Catholic elementary school.
Name as you naming your schools, uh, or naming what was going on. Name the schools that you went to.
Yeah, of
Sorry for
course.
interrupting, but I will be interrupting you.
No, that's fine. I went to St. Andrews Elementary School in Gladstone, Missouri, up north. Um, while I was there, I didn't really notice that there weren't a lot of people who looked like me. And I think that's because I'd never been around people who looked like me. This was my normal, was being the only or one of the only brown students in a primarily white classroom. I transferred to public school in the fifth grade. I went to Lion Creek Elementary for my fifth grade year. And I'm very grateful for my time in Catholic school because I feel like it really set me up for a rigorous, like, academic path. But I'm also very glad that I transferred to public school when I did. I feel like that was a key moment for me, like, ideologically. My parents were always very open with their political beliefs. They are both very proud Democrats, and they never felt the need to hide me from politics or shelter me from politics. They're very much of the opinion that for me as a brown woman, politics is not an abstract debate topic. It is something that was going to affect my life, was affecting my life already, and just because I was young, there was no reason to keep me from those issues. So, coming from a Catholic school environment, a lot of the issues I was surrounded by when I was younger was this pro-life push. I had a very vivid memory of John Kerry running for president, and my classmates, I'm in like second grade, my classmates are here talking about how like their parents tell him that he eats babies. And I remember even at that age being like, I don't think that
That
sounds right.
didn't register with you.
Right. I was like, that doesn't seem legit. Like, if he eats babies, how is he running for president? So, like, that was my introduction into the world of politics. And my parents wanted me to be prepared in an environment where, for my peers, politics was able to be this theoretical debate. So I moved into elementary school in fifth grade at Lion Creek, and academically, I found it a lot easier. I feel like I had a really strong base in my Catholic school. And I didn't really run into any major like shape like life-shaping events. My parents were very supportive and also very fierce. They didn't back down and they didn't let me back down when it came to my education. They held me to very high standards, and it did not, like, the shift to an easier academic environment only meant that they expected even more of me. So I grew up in a very academically rigorous
This program was brought to you by DeCapo's Cookies. Support your local bakers.
household. Um, and there was a flat expectation from the beginning that you're going to excel, you're going to be at the top of your class, you're going to go to college, and because what you do affects our family for generations. Like, you're the example for your cousins, you're the example for the younger generation. And their parents had pushed them to go to school because my grandparents were blue collar workers. They didn't have high levels of education. And for them, the best way to access the American dream was to get that education. So they pushed my parents to go to school, and my parents in turn pushed my brother and I to go to school. The first real life shaping moment I think I had was in 8th grade. And that was junior high. I went to Congress Middle School up north, and I was sexually assaulted in 8th grade near the end of my 8th grade year, going into high school. And that's a really weird time for everyone, women especially, coming into bodies that the world is paying attention to. So politics had always been an interesting portion of my life, and I think my Catholic education had shaped it a bit, pushing me into the pro-life camp without necessarily understanding the reasons for it, except for I was surrounded by people who told me that that's what was right. And while my parents wanted me to be politically aware, they also didn't want to push me towards their beliefs without any reason. They wanted me to come to what I believe on my own merits. And I think that that has been really impactful on me even now. That freedom to find out what I believe and why. And I think that why has been a big part of my educational journey. I feel like a lot of young people don't know the why, why they believe what they believe. And so that freedom to explore that was really impactful in who I am as a person. Um, so that experience for me in 8th grade really opened my eyes to a lot of women's issues. What the reality is of being a woman in America, being a brown woman in America, being a brown woman in America at the hands of a white man. Um, and it all kind of started shifting for me there, I think, pushing me to understand my experience, whether my experience was commonplace, unfortunately it is, why it's commonplace, and like how the system allows girls, even at the young age of 12, 13, to be forced to be aware of their bodies instead of just their developing minds. So like at 13, you're developing a lot. You're developing physically, you're developing mentally, you're developing socially. There's a lot going on right there. And I was very aware that my male counterparts had the privilege of only being forced to explore the rigors of their mental and social development. They didn't really have to worry about this physical thing. And that was a big impact on my politics as well. So by the time I got to high school, I went to Park Hill High School. I was in a very like neutral place politically, and also very motivated to find out where I was going to end up on that scale. I was ready for high school to kind of open the door for me in terms of how to learn about who I am academically and how that affects who I am outside of academics as well. My first real impactful teacher, I think I had both of them my first year, my freshman year. One of them was my language arts teacher, Miss Malone at the time, now Mrs. Greider. She's a Black woman, and she was the first Black teacher that I'd had in my entire educational career. And the second was my
What grade
AP.
was you in?
Yeah,
Ninth grade?
yes. And my second was Mrs. West, who was my AP Human Geography teacher. Both very strong women, both very academic, very intellectual, and both very unafraid to bring the realities of their lived experience into a classroom, which I feel like, especially if you teach at a suburban, middle class, primarily white institution, isn't always an easy thing to do. To say these are things that go against your lived experiences, but just because you haven't lived it doesn't mean the rest of us haven't. And that was my first real introduction into what it looked like to be an academic, educated woman using her education to shape the people that come after you. So high school really set me on my course, I think, and my parents, of course, playing a big part in this whole time, pushing me to excel academically. I found out I love history in high school through my male social studies teachers. They were wonderful, and they weren't quite as open politically as my female teachers, but they didn't exactly hide it. My first like Republican, out and proud Republican teachers were my history teachers, which I find interesting looking back on now, because most of the history professors I had in undergrad tend to lean left instead of right. So I find that change interesting. I started looking into college's junior year, which is its own incredibly difficult experience if you don't have someone telling you to what to do. It's incredibly difficult. We push young brown and black people to go to college, but if they don't have guidance on how to do it, it's a hard process. It's confusing. It's difficult to navigate. My mom went to nursing school, so she didn't go to a traditional 4-year college. She went to nursing school, and my dad worked his way through community college and then UMKC. So he also didn't have this 4-year big college, this is how you do this. And I was figuring it out for myself. I was very lucky. I had a counselor at school. Her name was Mrs. Olvera. She was wonderful. She was a great impact on me academically. And she helped me navigate this process. And if it hadn't been for her, I don't know that I would have figured out how to.
Interrupt you for a minute.
Yeah.
When you were talking about your history teacher, and people always say, I haven't interrupted you like I do a lot of my guests, but you were going with a flow that made, was telling me everything that I usually interrupt them to pull out. But with the history teacher, when you said you wanted to be a history major and you start, do you think that in your history classes they were teaching history?
Looking back on it now, not recent history. So my focus when I was in undergrad was ancient history. And in that sense, while the focus is very Eurocentric, I don't think that the facts are necessarily all that wrong in a lot of very old instances. We overlook a lot of stuff. But once you get to like the 1400s, the view of history definitely gets
Well, you say
different.
Ancient history, all history begins in Africa.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the main issues with American education is it's so Eurocentric. We talk about the Greeks and the Romans and completely neglect that there are entire empires in Africa and the Middle East right now that are thriving at the same time in human history.
But what you saying, hold it, let me, if I might correct you, you say American. No, history in general has been whitewashed by Europeans.
Of course.
I have this conversation constantly on, and in my grandmother's home, they had Martin Luther King's picture, they had a white Jesus, and they had John F. Kennedy. And
that white Jesus story is so interesting, actually. If you ever want to talk about where that image comes from, it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, well, I know where it came from.
I mean, like the particular, the person it was modeled off of.
Yeah, well, and when I say that, we know a lover.
Exactly, which is so funny.
that's the key point in getting educated, that the more educated you become, the better decisions you can make, life-changing decisions on what you, but we live in a age of such disinformation, and I think that uh, Trump attributed to a lot of it, but at the same time, he pulled a cover off of really what's really going on, and
I
so
think I think he contributed to the clownish aspects of it in a way, with this label of fake news and tweeting things that are like blatantly false, but the underlying issues here of not addressing certain parts of our history because it doesn't fit the image we want to portray has definitely been part of what we're founded
but
on,
I think
honestly.
not portrayed in my mind is that's the whole baseline of white supremacy.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
is
Not addressing
convincing the world that Europeans uh, invented everything. Europeans are the heroes and everything, and that has a devastating psychological effect on people of color.
Absolutely. And you definitely see remnants of that, not only with our own Black and Brown populations in the US, but in
Right.
Latin America, in African countries, in everywhere that's been touched by colonization, that harmful legacy of white superiority
And
is constantly perpetuated through educational systems.
and I'm saying through that disinformation, they have the people believing the lie. Uh, and I don't know whether it was you last night I was talking to, and I said, all you have to do is look at Brazil, all the Latin American companies. Very seldom do you see a dark skinned head of state. Uh, you have a Eurocentric uh, looking person at head of state, and in most of the positions of power.
Absolutely. And Europe is absolutely responsible for that shift. This idea of racism did not really, in its current form, did not really exist prior to European introduction into Africa. Slavery has existed since the beginning of
Right.
humans, but prior to Spain and Portugal entering into Africa, it was never based on skin color. You know, prior to that, slavery was based on citizenship. If you were Roman or not Roman,
Right.
Greek or not Greek, and if you weren't Greek or weren't Roman, you were up for grabs, and that's what it is. But if you were Roman, it wasn't I'm white, so I'm Roman. It was I live in the bounds of the Roman Empire, therefore I'm Roman. I didn't even learn about Rome's black emperors for years until I got into upper level history. And I think that's a problem because this upper level history, this great college environment that I was introduced where I was introduced to all this information isn't made available to
To the
everybody.
masses, to really the social, economically, and educational deprived. And as long as they can keep the masses in the dark, they can keep doing what they've been doing. Let's move on to uh, how you got into college and what was your freshman year like, and uh, how did you decide to choose the major that you chose?
So I applied to a couple different schools and I was accepted to the University of Notre Dame, which is where I decided to go ultimately. Um, Growing up in a Catholic household, Notre Dame is like the pinnacle of higher Catholic education, and also they're great
Jesuit
football team.
education.
Yeah. And and they have a good football team, which is debatable certain seasons, but um, so my freshman year was and wasn't a culture shock. Notre Dame is a primarily white institution, a PWI, and in that instance, I wasn't necessarily as out of my depth as other women and men of color who were coming to campus.
That
I'd
was
grown up in the
black for
suburbs.
real.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd grown up in the suburbs, which primarily white. I'd gone to primarily white schools my entire life, and I was very used to moving through a white world in a brown
You could
body.
assimilate very easily.
Exactly. But it was a culture shock in terms of economics and politics mostly. Notre Dame is a wealthy institution. It has a really high price tag in terms of tuition.
What are they
And
running, if you know?
undergrad tuition is somewhere between $53,000 and $58,000 plus everything else. So when it all comes together, if you go to Notre Dame's like cost of attendance page, they'll tell you for about a year of education, your estimated cost of attendance, including all the fees, your books, everything, is about $69,000 to $70,000,
That take
which
care
is
of me for
obscene.
5 years.
Yeah, it gets more expensive the longer you're here. So every year tuition goes up 3, 4, 5%, which is also absurd. So in terms of that, it was a huge economic shock. I'm from a solidly middle class family. We live very comfortably. I never had to worry about whether or not I was getting fed, but I also wasn't getting brand new cars and anything I wanted ever. My parents budgeted. They weren't out here buying.
Constraints.
Exactly. They weren't buying boats and lake houses and Porsches, which when I got to campus was definitely something I was surrounded by. There are BMWs and Range Rovers in the student parking lot, every other car. I went to school with people who paid out of pocket that $70,000 tuition like it was nothing. They didn't need a scholarship because their parents could write them a check for $70,000 for a year of education, and it wasn't that big of a deal. And it was also interesting because a lot of students who get into Notre Dame have been bred for it. Their parents went to high-ranking colleges. Their grandparents went to high-ranking colleges. They had tutors and prep and exam prep, and they understood the system and they understood how to use it to get them to this place. Which for a lot of Black and Brown students who go here, we didn't have that advantage. We didn't have ACT or SAT tutors or prep courses or someone grooming us on how to get to where we are. It was something that we were generally unprepared for in a way. We didn't necessarily know how to navigate that landscape, but we got here anyway.
I'm going to interrupt you again. From just what you're saying, my quick analysis of that is you might didn't have that, but most of the time y'all are smarter. Your drive is overwhelming, and that desire to achieve outdoes all the money and all the glitz and all of that. While they're doing what they're doing, you at the grind because you know
Exactly.
what you need to do to excel in their world, because their world
Exactly.
is the world that is ruling this world that we're living in.
The program is brought to you by the Kansas City Business Association.
Exactly. I grew up with a phrase which a lot of my Black friends have repeated back to me. We bond over it, surrounded by white people who have no idea what we're talking about, which is you have to work twice as hard for half of what they have. And that was very true. Everybody who gets into Notre Dame has a certain amount of drive to succeed. It's a very competitive environment, but in its Black and Brown populations, that drive is just it's not only a drive to succeed academically, it is a drive to drag up your family, to work against an entire system. Like the difference in drive is interesting to say the least.
This is what I want to ask you, because I asked all our young guests this also. Do you feel that you had to represent your race every time you were around the majority community?
Absolutely. And that's something that my parents, it's not that they enjoy putting that pressure on me, but they're aware that that pressure exists. And even from a young age, they wanted me to be aware of it. So, growing up, I grew up with the teaching that not only do you represent not just you represent your family everywhere you are in Kansas City. So if you act a fool, you make me look foolish from my parents' point of view. And as I grew older,
that's for real.
Yeah.
because this normal that they got now is not normal. And
Right.
what you do, sad, it's a sad situation because I'm shamed with some of the stuff I've done because I was brought up better, and I understand that reflects on my upbringing, which reflects
Exactly.
on my parents.
Exactly. And as I grew older and more accustomed to that pressure, my parents were like, all right, not only do you represent your family, you're brown, and in a primarily white area, you're the only brown person that these people are going to meet. And so the way that you act, unfortunately, shapes the way that they view everyone who looks like you. And on the flip side of that, if you run into somebody who's had negative experiences with someone who looks like you, those negative biases are going to come into their interactions with you. Which, you know, when we sat down to have the talk with my brother when he turned 15 and started driving, was something my parents really pushed. They're like, look, you're a Mexican male, you're a brown male. So when you go into encounters with police, with security, with people in authority, it doesn't matter that you grew up with white friends who treated you like you were white, that you would never do drugs or have access to a gun. What they're looking at when they see you is every single person in their previous history that they've met who looks like you, who also happened to do not great things. So they're bringing those biases into their interactions with you. And unfortunately, this individualism that's the bedrock of American society is something that's only reserved for white people. I mean, white people don't have to go into every interaction worrying how this is going to reflect on other white people. It's just a reflection of who they are as an individual for them, which is great for them. But for me, going into interactions with white people is, okay, this is me as a person, this is me as a woman, this is me as a Latinx, a member of the Latinx community, and this is me as a Latina. So all of these layers of how I need to present myself in primarily white spaces, it's a lot of pressure.
You know
um
why I have these type of interviews and talk about these type things?
why is that?
Because when like I'm pretty sure some of your classmates, once we put this up, you'll share it, and some of you, then they possibly can put a reset button and think, I heard what she said, and I think that it has a lot of truth to what she said, and I might need to rethink and recalibrate how I'm thinking about uh, people of color in general.
I really hope so. And what's really interesting for me, my freshman and sophomore year in particular, in college, is even though Notre Dame is a primarily white institution, it's also the place that I've met my core friends of color, my group, my friends of color, because we're a minority, which even further than we were wherever we came from. So here we need each other. We don't have our families here, you know, that safe space to go back to after you've had an exhausting encounter. So you need somebody who understands what you're going through. And you know, back home I have one brown friend, and it's because she happened to move into the neighborhood when I was in 6th grade. Here, these are all women of color who understand the struggle it took to get here.
When you,
And
excuse me, when you
yeah,
were in North Kansas City, you didn't come over here in the northeast side of town.
I grew up in the Northland up by Zona Rosa, so
Oh yeah,
every once in a while I got to go downtown to see the rest of my brown family,
good.
and that's about it.
Northeast, over there by Northeast High School and Northeast area. A lot of Hispanics are in that area. Uh, but I understand you really had the middle class suburban life, and why are you coming over the Northeast?
It was a blessing. I'm not trying to say that I hated my upbringing. I grew up in a really nice neighborhood with a lot of advantages, and but unfortunately one of those is kind of a separation from your culture.
And right, and that uh, that is something that really irks me about how being a minority in America. That separation, because it's a dichotomy. You're trying to climb the social and economic level, which definitely separates you from your community, because there's only a handful, comparatively speaking, when you put even the big numbers up, that are at that social and economic level. And for you to really be there, you have to really be socializing with that social structure.
Exactly. My parents didn't move to the suburbs to separate me from all the other Mexicans. They moved to the suburbs because when they were moving and starting a family, the suburbs were where you went to start a family, to have a house with a yard and a dog and
That
go to good
American dream.
schools. Exactly. And unfortunately, the people that they were surrounded by were white people because that's who the opportunity was open to.
What accolades in your undergrad? You know, I have your resume here, and usually, after the interviews, I post all the kids' resumes. Run down. I'm so damn lazy. Run down some of your accolades from your undergraduate. What some of the things you were involved in, and talk about that.
Yeah, so from an academic point of view, I was a history Spanish double major with a constitutional studies minor, which is an interesting mix of subjects, actually. My senior year, I won the Monsignor Francis A. O'Brien Award, which for the history department is the best history paper written by an undergraduate student.
What did you write on?
So, actually, I wrote about the sexualization of Black women in 19th century Cuba. It was fascinating. I learned so much, and it got me ready to fight literally everyone, even more than I was already willing to fight everyone. So I won that award my junior year. I studied abroad for a semester in Athens, Greece, which was a phenomenal experience. Um,
What did you think about? Excuse me for interrupting you again.
of
The
course.
Parthenon.
About what? I'm sorry.
Parthenon. Did you say?
Oh,
Athens? Yeah.
I'll talk about Greece for way too long if you get me started. The
Just a little
Parthenon was
bit.
beautiful. Architecturally phenomenal. Only really disappointing thing is that a lot of like actual artifacts from the Parthenon no longer belong to Greece. They are in other Western
That
European.
colonial, man, that damn England just
Yep.
said everything on the earth that we like, we taking and we putting in our museum.
Which is wild because if that can happen to Greece, who, England and the US see as the precursor to their civilization,
Western
just
civilization.
imagine what's going on in sub-Saharan Africa, which they think is less than them. It was absurd. But Greece was wonderful, and I'll talk about it anytime.
You coming back on, so we will
Would
talk.
love to. In terms of like clubs and stuff, I was a member of the Latino Student Alliance, LSA. And that was kind of the big one that I was involved in. I was super
How many
involved.
people are in that per se?
There's a couple hundred on
And what's
campus.
the theme on that? So that our audience knows, like you said, navigating to go to these big schools, you giving a little some breadcrumbs on these are some of the things, if you do get in, that you can be involved in.
Yeah, the Latino Student Alliance is great for anyone. And of course Notre Dame has, the Black Student Alliance. We did a lot of crossover actually between LSA and BSA, which I think is like the most harmony I've seen between the Latino and Black communities in America was in that subset.
What do you think about that? I'm interrupting again, but because I feel that Latinos, for the most part, especially in the leadership here in Kansas City per se, not naming no names, but they're not really trying to get with Black people. Everything is more on the surface, nicey nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely,
yeah.
in my opinion, that's a product of the system that they're operating in. Like this system does not want its minorities to get along with each other, because if they do, then the majority is screwed.
Yeah.
And that's the purpose in pitting us against each other. And the only thing that really sucks is that we let them. That's the worst part. It's like, I understand the strategy. Like, I understand why they pit us against each other. The annoying thing is that we let them do it.
And the annoying thing to me is if we came together, we're the strongest out here.
Absolutely.
Our resources, if we band them together, because we live in this economically driven mindset over people, then Black and Latinos, if they combine their buying power, their economic power, and used it politically, they would have to listen to everything we say.
Exactly. And that's that's part of the strategy. They want to make, the majority wants it to be a competition between who's had it worse. And so that's what we fight over, is who
And when
has
they
it
throw them
worse.
crumbs out, everybody.
Exactly. Never mind that, both of our communities have long histories of struggle. They're just different struggles. That doesn't make one worse than the other. That just makes them different. And we shouldn't be like, oh, well, we got oppressed more than you, so we deserve something more. Like, white people oppress everybody. So if we could all,
now, that new world order is kicking in big time.
exactly,
They got their foot on the gas.
There's a lot of colorism and anti-Black attitude in the Latino community, which we really need to address, because first of all, acting like there's no crossover. There's a huge Afro-Latinx population, because who primarily worked the Americas? Slaves, indigenous and slaves. So like trying to act like there's no crossover in our communities is absolutely absurd, first of all. And this coloristic view of the world is definitely a remnant of that colonial beginning for Latin American communities. And we want to act like we're different from Spain. We got our independence from Spain. We're not ruled by them anymore. But all of their systems are still in place, including those coloristic systems that push Eurocentric features.
You're talking my talk. You're talking systems.
Yep.
Things that are systemic. You can take everybody, move everybody, put new people with blank minds in that system, you're going to get the same results.
Right. And Latin America especially wants to act, post-independence like our country is just one country. This is something I ran into a lot doing research for my paper. In Cuba, everybody's Cuban, which is great on the face, but you have these racist structures still intact, which forces separation among Cubans. So even if you have this idea that in Cuba we're all Cubans, this racist structure is automatically going to elevate European-looking Cubans, European-linked Cubans, which is something you can find all throughout Latin America.
So now you're in grad school. Run down what your ambition is as it relates to where you go from here. What are your plans for 2021?
Yikes. So I am a 1L in law school. I'm in my first year. I decided I wanted to go to law school pretty early on. I saw a post from Humans of New York, actually, that was doing a featurette on a Syrian refugee who was being represented pro bono in the immigration system in America. And I followed that story incredibly close. And that was what I wanted to do. So I'm in law school. The ultimate aim is to be an immigration attorney right now. Something in the
got a bunch of loans or
oh, absolutely. I'm drowning in debt. To put
money up.
So law school at Notre Dame has a price tag of roughly $80,000 a year. So I have scholarship, a little bit of scholarship from Notre Dame, but I have $33,000 in federal student loans this semester.
So what you gonna do? You gonna get your degree and then start robbing banks?
Basically, I'm gonna cry for probably 10 years. The interesting dichotomy here at Notre Dame is that the image that they portray is Catholic social teaching. Leave the world better than you found it. Be a different kind of lawyer. And those are great ideals to strive for. Unfortunately, what happens a lot of the time is that Notre Dame students end up in big law, corporate defense law. And those positions are needed. Every kind of lawyer is needed. The problem is it comes at the expense of the public interest community that we push so hard in theory here.
Well, in general, let me interrupt you again. It's like here in Kansas City. All the damn politicians are lawyers, right? And lawyers can make a wrong a right or wrong. It's just like these accountants. If you really don't understand how the system works, they can massage numbers and make them look any kind of way. You be thinking you rich, you 20 years in debt.
Of course.
After they start shifting all different things. And so it's very, very, my take is, and I said this earlier, I think humanity, especially the white people and especially the 1%, they really need to look in the mirror and push an instant reset. The powers to be are ruining the planet. They killing everything that money can buy.
Mm-hmm. And that's fine for them because they have enough money to buy whatever they need.
That they, when you have money, what do they want to do? They want to go to Greece. They want to go to nice, pristine areas. But when you're killing the planet, sooner or later, every place is going to look like the ghetto. It's like, you have prestigious areas and you move a certain economic class in that neighborhood's going to go down.
Law is an interesting field to be in. There are only 2% of lawyers in this country are Latina, and only 4% are Latinx, which is an alarmingly
run that down, because you used that term earlier in your conversation.
Latinx.
Mm-hmm.
So Latinx, Spanish, like most Latin languages, is gender-based. So like feminine things are la and masculine things are el. So like a chair, for example, in Spanish is la silla, and a wall is like el pared. And there's no real rhyme or reason to why things are masculine or feminine. Latin, to make it gender neutral, you add an X to it. So if you're referring to a group, traditionally, if there was one man in a group of 50 women, it would be called Latinos, because that one man makes it an O. With this, and Latin culture is deeply sexist, to be completely honest.
I was just ready to ask you about machismo.
Yeah, it's a disease, and it stems from Spain's colonial conquest. I cannot stress that enough, because the indigenous tribes,
coming from a history major, people.
Yes, I have receipts. These indigenous tribes that inhabited the Americas were predominantly matriarchal societies. They there was a lot of respect and equality between men and women. And of course, this is a generalization. Each tribe was different, but in a lot of indigenous tribes in the Americas, female was not equated with inferior. Mother Earth, females could reproduce, which was seen to bring them closer to the gods. This idea that women are less than men definitely comes from
Eurocentric also.
Exactly. This destruction of the respect of women in the Americas has European roots, which is really upsetting. To talk about Europe like they came in and saved the savages, it's just false. If anything,
I don't know how you feel about this, and we just going to touch this and get off of it. About the Jesuits coming in and all that colonial stuff. The priests come and then the army comes.
Mm-hmm. The relationship between church and state was extremely close in Europe, and this Catholic conquest was a Catholic conquest in every sense of the word. It wasn't a conversion mission. But it was also conversion by force. Like, the Catholic Church exercised their will through their armies, which is disgusting.
And that's what modern people really don't even understand with this Muslim thing, this Christian thing. If I'm a Muslim, I'm thinking you making war on me. economically, socially, and all of this. And that that right wing on both them ends is
this idea that Islam is an inherently violent religion is spouted by Christians who are unfamiliar with their own history. First of all, Christianity, all the different forms of it, they're all rooted in Catholicism. Okay, Catholicism was what came first, and then different branches of Christianity came off of that. The Catholic Church was extremely violent for hundreds of years of its existence. So not only slavery and genocide of the indigenous were perpetuated under the seal of approval from the Catholic Church, but if you look at like the Inquisition,
it's all about money.
Exactly. It was all about money. And this idea that Christianity has always been this peace and flowers, we all love Jesus mentality is false. And so to say that Islam is the most violent religion, first of all, you've clearly never read the Quran, and you've also clearly never read the Bible, or a history book of literally any kind. The Bible is full of violent episodes, in the Old Testament especially. And Christianity employed those principles very real.
See, the Old Testament preached fire and brimstone. The New Testament preached love and happiness.
Right, and everyone wants to say that the message is the New Testament one, but push it by Old Testament means, which is not. No.
Well, all of that, like I said, I just wanted to touch on that for a minute because I'm spiritual. And as I said, all history began in Africa, and the first gods, real gods, were mother gods, and women, and that wisdom, that ancient wisdom, Mother Earth, and all. It's just like the American Indian. They couldn't wrap their head around. How do you buy the land? How do you own
exactly?
Land?
Exactly. And I was born and raised Catholic. I'm religious. I believe in the dogmas of the Catholic Church, but like being a part of a group doesn't buy it protection from criticism. And we need to be open about that in all aspects: religion,
that's what
race,
the
ethnicity
was about. Also, that as you said, if you don't agree, Satan got burn you. If you don't agree, bam. And so all of that violence that has been baked into Catholicism has been hidden. If you really only could get into that library in Rome.
I can't even imagine. I'm salty with the Romans for burning the Library of Alexandria because the amount of information.
I'm saying the secrets that are in those documents of how real history took place.
Absolutely. And I think this blind loyalty to a group is being unwilling to criticize a group that you're part of is, first of all, how we got to where we are. And it's a problem outside of just religion as well. I'm Mexican. I'm proud of my culture and I love it. But I can look at the Mexican community and say, we've got problems, because we do. We got problems. And being unwilling to say that, if you don't acknowledge the problem, how are you ever going to start to address it?
Well, listen, we starting to address it in these conversations.
Exactly.
And where I sit, I'm constantly bringing bad news to the Black community, certain sections, because I'm questioning. And it's like, here's Dr. Doom. No, I'm not Dr. Doom. I'm just telling you what I see. Like when they really try to go down on these rappers, I don't like all of the lyrics and different things, but if they weren't seeing these things happen, they would not be able to rap about them. And you upset that they're rapping about them in a certain way that offends your sensibilities. But
yeah,
this is the life that they're living.
And in the Mexican community in particular, I cannot speak for the entire Latinx community. First of all, it's so diverse and made up of so many like subsets, or even the entire Mexican community. But in my experience, the Mexican community, they want to climb, but they don't want to take the steps that you need to do that. So education is a huge part of how you understand the system so that you can work to dismantle it. You have to know who your enemy is before you start attacking it. And unfortunately, in my experience in a lot of Mexican communities, this education just is not front and center. My parents were an outlier, pushing me as hard as they did to go to school. And
But tell me this, a lot of what I see on the Northeast side, education is key, but after high school per se, a lot of them have to go to work to
exactly.
to
And
put milk
part of
on the table, and you already know the lower economic and social and educational scale you're on. I'm saying when we're talking about big numbers, a lot of the males done had kids before they leave high school. And
yeah,
now
there's
you
a problem.
really gotta go to work because them women want to put you on child support. And so
Exactly.
a lot
And
of the
of course these issues don't all stem from a lack of desire or drive in
Right.
any community. It's a reflection of their circumstances.
The system.
Absolutely.
The system
But
got them.
of course, and that's not their fault. But I think as a community we need to reprioritize. We need to have these hard discussions
Reset.
about sex and responsibility with our young members. We need to have a conversation about education versus work. Neither one is less than the other, but we need to talk about the realities of both of them and not push blindly into one or the other. We need to have conversations about what discrimination looks like against our community and within it as well. And we don't want to have these hard conversations because it's easier to not and accept that this is the way. Exactly. It's easier to accept that this is the way things are.
Go on home and eat some ice cream.
Exactly. Be sad about it. Luckily in my experience, my parents did not accept that. They said, this sucks, so you're gonna fix it.
How do you see I think I mentioned them because those is my girls, the squad.
Yes, they're wonderful. I think they represent what the majority is really terrified of, which is strong, educated, unafraid to say how it is women of color, Black women, brown women, women who know how to back up what they're saying with real facts.
Down.
Exactly. They come from warriors, and their parents, their grandparents fought the system on the lowest level that you can go. They went through poverty, they went through discrimination, they went through the immigration process, refugee process, religious discrimination. They understand the worst parts of America and they want to make it better. And by doing that, they have to talk about the worst parts of America, which is something the majority doesn't want to hear.
That's what I do, but I tell them in a minute, a New York minute where I'm from, I raised that flag and proud of it. My people built this place, and you're not going to railroad. I don't care about that Spangled Banner, the song and all of that. You know what I know? Reality. Black people built this country, and that flag is my flag more than anybody else as far as I'm concerned. When you start trying to put, America great and all of this other stuff, I ain't trying to hear it.
Exactly. America has always been great for the few that it was designed to work for. And it's never been designed to work for everybody. Even in the most favorable light that you can view it, this country was founded by wealthy land-owning white men to benefit wealthy land-owning white men. Mm-hmm. And to look at it in any other way is to distort and reduce history, and it's upsetting.
and you know what's, and we're going to close this out. You know what's really upsetting to me too, and I won't say upsetting, disappointing, and really shows a bunch of ignorance when you look at it from an academic. When they tell Mexicans and Hispanic people that go back to Mexico and this and that. The America was Hispanic.
Yeah.
Latin America. These are Latin America. The Americans was
yeah.
Latin.
First of all, California, Nevada, Arizona, Texas, those were Mexican until we took it by force.
Right, and then you be talking about wetback and illegal alien. Europeans are the only ones that's illegal here in the Americas.
Exactly. And another issue I have with that is something that I know that the Black community struggles with as well, which you love our culture and you don't love us. White people have no problem going to Cancun on spring break or drinking tequilas or celebrating Cinco de Mayo or going for Taco Tuesday. It's not, you don't hate
The
Mexican
Europeans
culture.
have stolen everybody's history. They take the best out of everything.
Exactly.
And then, assign it as theirs.
Yeah, that clip from a couple years ago of those college students on a boat in Cancun chanting "Build the Wall" was so infuriating because, like, are you kidding me? You are in Mexico, leeching off of Mexican culture, Mexican beaches, Mexican food, Mexican drink, and you have the audacity to chant "Build a Wall." If anything, they should screen us when we go into Mexico for
even the drug problem. That's why Latin America be saying we don't have no problem. It's you.
Right. Supply and demand. The reason that the drug trade is flourishing is because there are people buying it. Also, if you want to really talk about how these issues came up, Latin America probably would have been fine if we hadn't gone in and destabilized every single Latin American country at some point between the 50s and the 80s with the express purpose of stealing their natural resources.
Well, that's what we do, honey.
Yeah, that's what we're good at. And now we're mad that the countries we destabilized are destabilized and people don't want to live in destabilized countries. And we're just like, what do you mean we have to deal with the consequences of something that we created? What? And we don't want to. We don't want to even acknowledge that we went into countries and assassinated their democratically elected leaders.
First of all, you have to be educated to really understand, because you're a history major. Most people over here in the States, especially in our lower economic and social classes, they're very uneducated to what the world looks like per se. They know the digitalization of the world, but they really don't understand how people feel about Americans when you start going to
Oh, when you go outside the country, you get hit in the face with what people think about Americans. Even in allied countries, even in Greece, which is an ally of the US, it was just like, oh, you're American?
Yeah.
Yikes.
And our image has been tarnished. And as you know, I'm part of the diaspora, but I swear to God, I'm an American. Born, raised here. I have roots elsewhere, but I'm not gonna let no white person, no brown person, no yellow person tell me that I'm not American and this country is just as much mine as anybody else's on this planet.
Oh, exactly. I have people tell me to go back to where I came from. My family's been here 100 years. It's probably been here longer than yours. If you came over in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, my family's been here longer than yours.
Yeah. And so, as I said, having these conversations, some majority community would feel that we're picking on the white community, but I think we have to have these conversations so that if you look at this, you say, well, I might can look and see what they're talking about. Maybe I wasn't as sensitive as I needed to be. Maybe I really need to try to string up a relationship with a Black person or a brown person, a Latino person, so that I really can get to know them. Do I really want to make this change? That's the situation I feel with the majority community. Most of them really want to wash their hands of slavery and all of this and use the excuse, well, I didn't do it, but you're benefiting from it now. And
exactly.
If you morally correct, what I feel morally correct is you would see this as wrong and you would try to dismantle it and you would try to live what most of them are Christian, your Christian faith is about.
Exactly.
Love that brother. How can you love that brother when you telling the brother, don't live next to me? don't want you in my schools, don't want you really around. And
Exactly. I find it it's scripture's thrown around a lot to justify a lot of things, which is interesting because Jesus spoke out specifically against that, knowing scripture on its face and being ignorant to the meaning of it. And you can find quotes in the Bible to justify anything. To justify slavery, to justify sexism, to justify the murder of people who aren't like you. The problem is cherry picking any verse and making it stand on its own. You have to understand the Bible, if you're Christian, in its entirety. And you'll have to understand the spirit of it before you start throwing it out as a weapon. It's not meant to be a weapon. We are meant to welcome people to our faith, and the fact that Christianity in its current form turns people away from it should be a red flag to the entire religious community. And more in like similar in that vein, I get a lot of like, oh, if you hate it here, just leave. The problem is not that I hate it here. The problem is that I love it here, and I hate to see us not living up to our ideals. So like failing so thoroughly to live up to what we could be.
I love you in the explanation that you, it's not that we hate it or anything. We love it here. It's the best place on the planet to be. But
it has the potential to be the best place. And the problem is we set wonderful ideals out. We have the principles that we espouse are not something to give up on. Justice, freedom, these are all things that we should strive for. Equality in every aspect of our lives. The problem is that we are failing so egregiously to live up to these expectations that it's almost making a mockery of them, to hide behind them. To say that America is equal is to blatantly ignore the lived reality of most of its inhabitants. To say that America is just is to ignore the practice policies of America inside and outside the country. And to say that it's free is to ignore systemic restraints on people who are doing their best to succeed in a country that's working actively against them. And it makes a mockery of these principles that we love so much, to pretend that we're living up to them, to have such high goals, to have such high expectations, and to have the ability to reach them places a responsibility on the country and the people who live in it to work to reach them. So I don't hate it here. I love it here. And I hate to see how sick and how hard the country is failing to live up to the expectations that it sets for itself.
So in closing, that was almost a closing statement there.
I have a lot of feelings.
Yeah, right. But what would you want to part with closing statements? Let me give you a little something here, darling. What would you say to a young freshman, what they need to be doing? Freshman, senior in high school, freshman in college. What advice would you give them? And what closing statement would you say that you want to impart specifically to the Latino community? And what overall statement do you want to express to the world, the people?
To Latinos and Latinx people, right now, we come from such a proud tradition. We come from strong, storied people on, like, no matter where you come from in Latin America, you have a history, you have roots, and you have strong ancestors, because that is how you got here. We can be representations of that strength. We are working in a system that was not designed to help us, but that doesn't mean that we can't continue to work against it. And it's hard, and you have to work really hard at it, and it's not fair. But the more of us that break through this barrier, the easier it is for people who are coming up behind us. If you are a brown man, if you're a Latino in Kansas City, if you're a Latina, if you don't know what your next step is, reach out to me. I am here to help you. And that's the goal, isn't it? Of making it to a place of betterment, is to make it easier for the people who are coming after you. So like we need to work as hard as we are, and it's worth it. We're not working for our own individual self-gain, although of course that's a benefit. We are working for the betterment of our country, for the betterment of our families, the betterment of our people. And unfortunately, that's a lot of pressure, but we've never shied from hard work, and this is no arena. This is the most important arena to work in. So if you need help, like, I'm here for you. Our circumstances are hard, but we've come from a people who've dealt with adversity our entire existence. Mexicans come from adversity. We are the meeting of Spanish and indigenous, and that did not come about peacefully. We came about in a difficult situation, and we have lived with this adversity our entire existence. We can do this because we have done it. We are strong and we can do this. And if you need guidance and help, that's what succeeding is for. It's meant to help the people who come after us. So if you're Latino, Latina, you're in school, you don't know what your next step should be, reach out to me and I will totally help, listen to you, advise you, whatever you need.
When you went through that, I won't say diatribe, but when you went through that, what came in my mind, Mexicans have walked through fire.
Yeah.
Literally, if you even understand when you start talking about that Spain and indigenous, that's what went to my mind. And since I'm a history buff, if you really understood when Spain came to the Americas, what that was like for indigenous people.
Exactly.
For Mexicans, no matter Aztec or any of them, man, you was walking through hell.
Yeah, we were born in fire, and we have walked this entire continent. We have walked through history, and we can continue to do so. That's what we are built for. To the world as a whole, I guess, I just want to say that being critical is not an attack. The only way to get better at something is to continue to poke at the weaknesses. And so talking about these issues, talking about the weakness in America, the weaknesses of the majority, the weaknesses of our community, is not to denigrate them. It's not to shame them into going away, or to blame everybody for the entirety of their past. The issue is that if you don't expose your weaknesses, they're going to remain weaknesses. If you overlook what you're not good at, you're going to continue to not be good at it. Perfection does not spring into existence overnight. It is a culmination of a lot of hard work. So, expressing the lived difficulties of brown people in this country, of brown women in this country, is not saying that the country isn't worth living in, that the majority isn't worth engaging with. It's the opposite of that. It's saying that I know this is worth fighting for, and I know this is worth doing, so I'm going to do it even though it's hard. And I think that that's something that is difficult for people who are in the center of this criticism to talk about. Nobody's saying white people are the spawn of Satan, and that every single issue ever created rests on individual white people who are currently alive. That's ridiculous. The problem is that if you're white in this country, you have less roadblocks by virtue of being white. Nobody's saying that you don't have roadblocks. No one's saying your life isn't hard, but the reason that your life is hard is not because of your skin color. And so this responsibility that we're bringing this up shows that we have faith that white people can work to change it. Nobody's throwing everybody under the bus here. And I think that open dialogue, genuinely open dialogue, criticisms and all, is becoming harder and harder to have in this country because people want to get defensive. This is not an attack. This is an offer for collaboration.
Exactamundo. Now run it down for them young seniors and freshmen with their hard head think they know everything. Run it down what the real deal is, the track they need to get on.
Okay, here's the thing. If you think you're the smartest person in the room, find a different room. You should never be in a situation where you're not learning. And it doesn't have to be necessarily book knowledge. Book knowledge is not the only knowledge that matters in this country. But if you are not pushing yourself to find new experiences, new information, new groups of people, you're not pushing yourself hard enough. And you have to go into everything with a healthy dose of skepticism. Don't believe what people tell you. Do your own research and do it well. You have to understand what sources are legitimate and what sources are not when you're doing research. Because, like you said, you can find anything on the internet. Information has never been more readily available, but neither has disinformation. So you need to know what you're looking at and where it comes from. And you need to keep looking at it. That's the thing. You have to push yourselves. Latinos and Latinas in this country, you know the year that the Constitution was written, and you know the Revolutionary War, but do you know the year that the Civil Rights Act was passed? Do you know your history within the larger history? Because Latino history, Mexican history is American history also. You need to know the story of your people, and you're not going to learn that with the way that the system is set up now. You have to have curiosity and you have to have drive. So educate yourselves in the proper way and keep doing it always. You should never feel like you don't have any more to learn.
Oh boy, this has been a excellent interview from my perspective.
Thank
Didn't
you.
break in as much as I do on most of my interviews, but it was a plum pleasing pleasure. That's a line that my other interviewer, Jim Watts, I steal his line all the time. When he closes, that's what he always, it's a plum pleasing pleasure to have you on the show tonight. So I done stole that, Jim.
It was a pleasure to be here. I'm always here to talk very aggressively about the problems in this country and how to fix them.
All right. And as I say, let him try to steal my line, I'm ready as hell. We close all our programs with, when you invest in your community, you're really just investing in yourself. Good night. This is brought to you by the Location 1 Building, 1734 East 63rd Street. When you invest in your community, you're really just investing in yourself.